There's a moment when everything changes. 1 second, one choice. For Maddison Holt, it was when she held that contract in her hands and realized if she stayed silent, hundreds of families would be destroyed. So she did the impossible, confronted the most powerful man in Manhattan, whispered a devastating truth, and unleashed a love that neither she nor he were prepared to face. This is the story of a janitor who tore up more than just a contract.
Manhattan never sleeps, but there's a moment between 3 and 4 in the morning when even this city seems to sigh. It's in that gap that Maddison Holt pushes her cleaning cart through the corridors of the 18th floor, where silence has the weight of velvet and the scent of imported coffee still lingers in the air. She doesn't belong in this world of glass and steel, and she knows it. Every step she takes is measured, calculated, as if treading on foreign soil. The motion sensor lights flicker on as she moves forward, revealing empty rooms where decisions that move millions were made hours earlier. Decisions that would never include her, not even as a footnote. But Maddison has learned to exist in the spaces left behind, to clean up the traces of lives that would never cross hers. At least, that's what she thought. The main conference room is always last. Floor-to-ceiling glass, an oval table that seems to float, leather chairs that cost more than 6 months of her rent. Maddison turns on the vacuum, but something makes her pause. Papers scattered across the table, an open contract with colorful post-its marking specific pages. She should ignore it, should move on, but there's a restlessness pulling at her, a familiar discomfort she inherited from her mother. The need to understand what's being said between the lines. So she steps closer. Just a quick look, she thinks, just to see what it's about.
The words begin to jump off the page like sparks. Merger, operational restructuring, workforce reduction. Maddison frowns. This isn't just corporate jargon. It's the kind of language that hides real people. She flips through a few more pages, her heart racing for no apparent reason. And then she finds it. Clause 7, paragraph 3. Termination without severance for Class C production units. She stops, reads it again and again. Her stomach turns. This means mass layoffs. Hundreds of families thrown to fend for themselves, all massed in technical terms that few would bother to decipher. She knows this strategy, saw her mother expose contracts like this before she got sick. Maddison looks around, as if someone might hear her thinking. The city outside glows indifferent, a sea of lights that doesn't care what happens on the 18th floor. She should leave, finish her shift, catch the subway, sleep the few hours left before the sun rises. But something inside her, something stubborn, inconvenient, dangerously close to hope, keeps her from simply pretending she didn't see it. Because Maddison knows what it's like to be invisible, knows what it's like to work until your bones ache and still not be enough. And now, holding that contract, she has something few people have: information. The question is, what is she going to do with it?
She takes a photo of the pages with her cracked phone. Her hands tremble slightly, not from fear, but from a strange, almost electric adrenaline. Maddison isn't impulsive. Life hasn't allowed her to be. But in this moment, she feels like she's on the edge of something she can't name. Maybe it's justice, maybe it's madness, or maybe it's just the first time in a long time that she's allowing herself to believe her voice might matter. She puts her phone away, takes a deep breath, that long, measured pause she always takes when the world feels too big, and returns to her cart. But something has changed. She has changed. In the hours that follow, as she cleans bathrooms and empties trash cans, Maddison can't stop thinking. The CEO's face appears in her mind. Roman Callahan. The man whose signature is about to seal the fate of hundreds of people he'll never meet. She's seen him from a distance, always surrounded by expensive suits and calculated smiles, a man who seems made of ice and ambition. But does he really know what he's signing? Or does he blindly trust lawyers who are more concerned with pleasing than questioning? The doubt gnaws at her. And Maddison, who has always kept herself invisible, begins to consider the unthinkable, becoming seen. When her shift ends and she walks out of the building, the sky is already beginning to lighten with that gray-pink tone New York uses as a disguise for hope. Maddison walks to the subway with the weight of what she's discovered pressing on her chest. She doesn't know yet how she'll do it, doesn't know if she'll have the courage, but one thing she knows: tomorrow, when Roman Callahan walks into that conference room to sign the contract, she'll be there. And this time, it won't just be to clean up the mess the powerful leave behind.
The conference room is different in daylight. What was silence and shadows in the early morning now pulses with an almost tangible tension. Men in impeccable suits, women with tablets in hand, all orbiting around Roman Callahan like planets around a cold, distant sun. Maddison watches it all through the glass as she pushes her cart down the hallway, her heart pounding so loud she fears someone might hear it. She shouldn't be here at this hour. Her supervisor made it clear night shifts never cross paths with the corporate workday. But Maddison switched shifts with a coworker, lied about a doctor's appointment, did the impossible to be exactly here, exactly now. Because some things can't wait. Some injustices don't deserve the luxury of patience. She holds her breath those precious seconds when she searches within herself for a safe place to exist and pushes the door open. The sound of the cleaning cart entering the room is like a record scratching in the middle of a symphony. Every head turns. The silence isn't just absolute, it's sharp, cutting, full of instant judgment. Maddison feels the weight of every gaze, the disbelief stamped on faces that can't process why someone like her would dare to interrupt a moment like this. But she's already crossed the invisible line that separates those who serve from those who are served. There's no going back. So she walks. Each step a silent declaration that she exists, that she matters, even if no one in this room has ever stopped to notice. Roman Callahan is standing, pen in hand, the contract open before him like an altar about to receive a sacrifice. He's exactly as Maddison imagined. Broad shoulders, firm jaw, eyes that seem capable of calculating the value of a soul in seconds. But there's something more. A shadow crosses his face as she approaches, as if he's trying to figure out whether this is a bad joke or a real threat. Maddison stops a few steps away from him. Her hands are sweaty, but her voice, when it finally comes out, is steadier than she expected. "Don't sign that." The words hang in the air like a bomb about to explode. Someone laughs nervously, another whispers something inaudible, but Roman just stares at her, his dark eyes fixed on hers as if he's seeing something he didn't expect to find. "And why should I listen to a janitor?" The question comes out loud, projected for the entire room, but loaded with something more: curiosity disguised as disdain. Maddison feels the flush rising up her neck, but she doesn't look away. She knew this was coming, knew she'd be reduced, diminished, turned into an anecdote. But if there's one thing life has taught Maddison Holt, it's that you don't need a fancy title to recognize right from wrong. "Because I read the entire contract last night," she responds, her voice still steady, still defiant, "and I know you didn't." The silence that follows is different, thicker, more dangerous, because she didn't just question a decision, she questioned his competence. And in a world where power is everything, that's heresy.
Roman takes a step forward. He's tall, intimidating, the kind of presence that makes entire rooms bow. But Maddison doesn't back down. Maybe because she's already lost so much that there's not much left to fear. Maybe because for the first time in years, she feels like she's doing something that matters. "Explain," he orders, his voice low, but loaded with an authority that brooks no disobedience. And then, to everyone's surprise, including her own, Maddison explains, points out Clause 7, Paragraph 3, describes how the language was constructed to hide the real impact. mentions the hundreds of families that will be affected. And as she speaks, something strange happens. Roman begins to flip through the contract, his eyes racing across the pages with growing urgency. And Maddison realizes, with a mix of relief and terror, that he really didn't know. No one told him. His expression changes, first confusion, then anger, not directed at her, but at something bigger, deeper. He turns to Kaylani Langford, the head of legal, who's pale as paper. "You saw this?" His voice is pure ice. Kaylani opens her mouth, but nothing comes out. Roman throws the pen onto the table with enough force to make the sound echo. "Everyone out! Now!" No one questions it. In seconds, the room empties, leaving only Maddison, Roman, and the crushing weight of what just happened. She stands there, trembling inside, but still with her head held high, as he watches her with an intensity that seems capable of dismantling every layer of defense she's built over the years. And then he does something unexpected, something that changes everything.
He pulls out a chair and points to it. "Sit." It's not a request, but it's not an order either. It's something in between. A tacit acknowledgement that in this room, in this moment, they're not CEO and janitor. They're two people facing an inconvenient truth. Maddison hesitates but sits, and as Roman leans over the table, his eyes still on the contract, she realizes she's crossed the line from which she can never return, because he now knows her name. And she, for the first time, has seen beyond the cold mask he wears as armor. What comes next, neither of them is prepared to discover.
The following days unfold like a strange dream Maddison can't wake up from. Roman Callahan canceled the contract signing, triggered a corporate earthquake, and now she, the janitor who dared to speak, has become the center of a silent hurricane. She returns to the night shift, hoping everything will go back to normal, that the episode will be forgotten like an embarrassing anomaly. But on the third night, as she's cleaning the 17th floor hallway, he appears. Roman Callahan, sleeves rolled up and tie loosened, walking toward her with the posture of someone who carries the weight of decisions that can ruin empires. Maddison freezes. The cleaning cart suddenly seems ridiculous, inadequate. A cruel reminder that, despite everything, she's still who she's always been. But he doesn't seem to notice. Or maybe he simply doesn't care. "I saved you from a mistake that would have cost millions," Roman says without preamble, stopping a few steps away from her. There's no smile, no attempt to soften the moment, just the naked truth, spoken with that brutal frankness she's beginning to associate with him. Maddison grips the mop handle, looking for something to do with her hands. "I just read what was there," she responds, her voice lower than she'd like. He shakes his head. "My lawyers read it too, but you were the only one who understood what it meant." There's something in the way he says it, as if he's admitting a personal defeat, as if her competence is both impressive and humiliating. And then he makes the offer. Temporary legal assistant, decent salary, a chance to work with real contracts. Maddison should feel grateful, should say yes immediately. But all she feels is a wave of fierce, almost animal distrust.
"I don't want your charity." The words come out sharper than she intended, loaded with years of empty promises and help that always came with a price. Roman frowns, as if she said something completely absurd. This isn't charity, Maddison. It's the first time he's used her name, and the sound is strange, too intimate, too close. You have a talent that's being wasted scrubbing floors, and I have a company that almost made a catastrophic mistake because no one around me had the courage to tell me the truth. He takes a step forward, and she notices for the first time the exhaustion in his eyes. I need someone who's not afraid to contradict me, and you just proved you're that person. The argument is logical, sensible, but Maddison knows the world well enough to know that logic is rarely enough when you come from where she comes from.
She accepts, not because she trusts him. Trust is a luxury she can't afford, but because Arya is in the shelter, because the bills keep coming, and because a part of her, small, stubborn, dangerously hopeful, wants to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserves something better than invisibility. In the days that follow, Maddison finds herself in a completely new world. There are no more night shifts. There are meetings, documents, whispered conversations about strategies that move millions. She works alongside Kaylani Langford, who watches her with a mixture of resentment and curiosity, as if she can't decide whether Maddison is a threat or an ally. And there's Roman, always present, always watching, always asking questions that seem simple but carry a weight she can't name yet. He's not the Iceman she imagined. He's worse. He's human.
One evening, after a particularly tense meeting with Calvin Donner, the investor who seems willing to sell his own soul for the right profit, Roman finds her alone in the document room. She's reviewing contracts, her eyes burning with exhaustion, but unable to stop. He leans against the doorway, arms crossed, just watching. "You don't need to do all of this today," he says, his voice strangely gentle. Maddison doesn't look up. "Yes, I do. If I stop, I'll remember I shouldn't be here." The confession escapes before she can contain it, raw and unprotected. Roman is silent for a long moment, and then he says something that changes everything. "I grew up rich, lost everything at 20 when my father was arrested for fraud. I've spent the last 13 years rebuilding, proving I wasn't him. And you know what I learned?" He moves closer, and Maddison finally looks up. "That the people who most deserve to be here are the ones who think they don't." The distance between them is too small. Maddison should step back, reestablish the professional boundaries that exist for a reason. But there's something in his eyes, a vulnerability he rarely lets slip, an exhaustion she recognizes because she carries the same one. And then Roman does something completely unexpected. He smiles. Not that polished corporate smile he uses in meetings, but something genuine, almost shy. "You're the only person who's ever told me the truth without expecting anything in return," he admits, his voice low like a confession. And Maddison, who has spent her entire life being invisible, suddenly feels seen in a way that's both liberating and terrifying. Because being seen means being vulnerable, and vulnerability, she knows, always comes with a price.
They don't talk about what happened that night, but something has changed. There are looks that linger a second too long, conversations that extend beyond what's necessary. Roman begins to ask for her opinion in meetings, ignoring Kaylani's protests and Calvin's veiled disapproval. And Maddison, despite all her self-preservation instincts, begins to allow herself to believe that maybe she's not just an anomaly, that maybe her place in this world isn't a mistake, that maybe the man beside her sees in her something more than a janitor who read a contract at the right time. But belief, she's about to discover, is a dangerous thing, especially when the world around you is determined to prove you were wrong from the start.
The kiss happened 3 weeks later, on a night when Manhattan seemed to be on fire with neon lights and promises no one intended to keep. They worked late, again, reviewing every line of a new agreement Roman insisted on doing differently, on doing right. Maddison was exhausted, her eyes burning, but there was a strange energy in the air, an electric current that made every word exchanged seem to carry a double meaning. And then, as she was putting away the documents, Roman touched her hand. It was just a second, just a brush of fingers over fingers, but it was enough to detonate something they'd both been repressing with all the strength they had. He pulled her close, and she didn't resist. The kiss was inevitable, urgent, full of a hunger neither of them knew they carried. And when they pulled apart, breathless and vulnerable, Maddison knew she'd crossed the line from which she'd never return. The problem is that the world doesn't ask permission to destroy what you've just built. The news leaked on Monday. Maddison wakes up to frantic messages from unknown numbers, opens her phone and sees her own face plastered on a corporate gossip site. Billionaire CEO and his Cinderella, romance or opportunism. The headline is cruel, but the speculation is worse. They say she set it all up, that the contract was a sham, that she seduced Roman to secure a promotion. There are photos taken from invasive angles, stolen moments that have been distorted until they look like evidence of something sordid. Maddison feels the ground disappear beneath her feet. She never asked for attention, never wanted to be seen this way. And now the whole world is watching, judging, reducing everything she is to a cheap stereotype. She wants to disappear, wants to return to the safe invisibility of night shifts, but the phone keeps ringing, and she knows there's nowhere left to run.
Roman is furious, not with her, never with her, but with everything and everyone around him. He calls an emergency meeting, gathers his legal team, demands they find the source of the leak. But Calvin Donner just smiles, that shark smile that promises nothing but blood in the water. This is what happens when you mix business with impulses, he says. The word's dripping poison. The investors are nervous, Roman. They didn't invest in a fairy tale. The room goes tense. Kailani looks away. The others pretend to be busy with their tablets. And Roman, for the first time since Maddison has known him, seems to be losing control. She's sitting in the corner, trying to make herself small, trying not to exist. But then his eyes find hers across the room. And in that look, there's something she never expected to see. Fear. Not of losing money, not of losing power, but of losing her. The following days are a calculated hell. Investors threaten to pull funding. The media turns their every move into a headline. There are articles analyzing Maddison's life, her childhood, her mother's illness, the shelter where Aria is. Strangers on the internet have opinions about every choice she's ever made. And the worst part is that a part of her starts to believe them, starts to think that maybe she really is an intruder, someone who doesn't deserve to be where she is, someone who's ruining the life of a man who only tried to be decent. She avoids Roman for 2 full days, refusing meetings, pretending to be sick. But on Thursday, he shows up at the door of her tiny Bronx apartment, and the contrast is brutal. Him, in his $3,000 suit, standing in the hallway where the smell of mold competes with fried food and muffled shouts from neighbors. Maddison opens the door just a crack. "You shouldn't be here," she whispers, but he's already pushing inside.
Roman looks around. The mattress on the floor, the kitchen that's just a stove and a sink, the thin walls that hide nothing. And Maddison feels shame. A deep, visceral shame that makes her want to scream for him to leave, to go back to the world of glass and steel where he belongs. But he says nothing about the apartment, makes no comments, just stares at her with that intensity that disarms all her defenses. "They want me to choose," he says, his voice hoarse. "The company or you." Maddison closes her eyes. She knew it would come to this, always knew. "Then choose the company," she responds, the words coming out steadier than she feels. "It's what makes sense." But Roman shakes his head, and there's something wild in his eyes now, something that resembles desperation. "You don't understand. I spent 13 years rebuilding everything my father destroyed. 13 years proving I was different. And you know what I discovered?" He takes a step forward, and Maddison backs up until she hits the wall. "That I was building a prison, and you were the first person who showed me the way out." The meeting happens on Friday. Crowded room, investors with stern expressions, Calvin Donner sitting like a judge ready to condemn. Roman enters last, Maddison at his side, a silent declaration that makes half the room freeze. Calvin leans forward, fingers interlaced like claws. "Let's get straight to the point. You either end this situation and regain focus, or we withdraw our support."
The ultimatum hangs in the air like a suspended blade. Maddison feels her heart race. She should get up, should make it easier for him. But before she can move, Roman speaks. And what he says changes everything. Then withdraw. The silence is absolute, shocked, disbelieving. Calvin blinks as if he's not sure he heard right. What? Roman turns to face each person in the room. She taught me something you've all forgotten. That profit without integrity is just greed. That people matter more than numbers on spreadsheets. If you can't work with someone who prioritizes that, then we don't need you.
The bomb detonates in slow motion. Calvin turns red. Two investors stand up and leave immediately. Kaylani covers her face with her hands. And Maddison, for the first time since it all began, feels hot tears streaming down her face. Because she never asked to be saved, never wanted to be the reason someone sacrificed everything. But Roman isn't looking at the investors walking out, isn't calculating the cost of what he just did. He's looking at her. And in his eyes, there's something she's never seen directed at herself. An absolute, irrational, dangerous devotion. The kind of devotion that builds empires or destroys them completely. And Maddison, trembling between tears and terror, realizes that love isn't the fairy tale they sell in movies. Love is this: two people standing on the rubble of what the world expected from them, choosing each other despite everything. But the story she's about to discover isn't over yet, and the consequences of that moment are only beginning to unfold.
The financial crisis arrives like a tsunami 2 months later. Half the investors left, the contracts that depended on them collapsed, and the company Roman spent years building is bleeding money. He doesn't talk about it, at least not directly, but Maddison sees it in the meetings that stretch into the early morning, in the tense phone calls he takes with his jaw locked, in the way he rubs his face with his hands when he thinks no one is watching. And the worst part is knowing that all of this has a name, has a face, has her. Because it was his choice, choosing Maddison over the company, that triggered everything. And no matter how many times Roman says he doesn't regret it, she sees the truth in the numbers that don't lie, in the layoffs that start happening, in the looks from employees who now fear for their own livelihood. She's become the weight that's sinking the ship. Maddison starts to pull away. Not dramatically, she doesn't have the courage for that, but gradually, in small doses of distance she hopes he won't notice. Turns down dinners, makes excuses not to stay late, avoids his gaze in meetings because she knows that if she meets it, she'll fall apart. Roman tries too hard. Shows up with coffee in the morning, sends messages she answers with monosyllables, asks what's wrong in that voice loaded with vulnerability that breaks her heart. But Maddison can't tell the truth. Can't admit that every time she looks at him, she sees the hundreds of people who lost their jobs, sees the empire he sacrificed, sees the future she destroyed. So she lies, says she's tired, that she needs space, that maybe they move too fast. And Roman, who's always been so good at reading people, can't read her. Or maybe he simply doesn't want to believe what he's seeing.
The last straw comes on a bland Tuesday when Calvin Donner schedules an informal meeting at an expensive restaurant Maddison would never have entered if not for his insistence. She should have refused, should have seen the trap. But there's something in the way he said it's about Roman's future that made her accept. Calvin orders wine that costs more than her rent and gets straight to the point. Do you love him? The question is sharp, surgical. Maddison hesitates, and Calvin smiles as if she's confessed a crime. Then you know what you need to do. He leans forward, his cold eyes calculating her every reaction. I have investors ready to come back, have contracts that can save the company, but they won't negotiate as long as you're in the equation. It's not personal, Maddison. It's just that you've become a liability. He pauses, letting the words sink in like poison.
If you really love him, you'll let him move on. Or will you stay and watch while everything he built turns to ash? Maddison can barely breathe on the way back. Calvin's words echo in her mind like a cruel but true mantra. She always knew she didn't belong in that world, always knew the fairy tale had an expiration date. But a part of her, that stubborn part that Roman awakened, believed that love would be enough, that together they could defy the odds. But love doesn't pay bills. Love doesn't prevent layoffs. And love, she now understands, sometimes means letting go of the person you most want to hold on to. When she gets home, the tiny Bronx apartment seems smaller than ever. She looks around, the old suitcase under the bed, the few clothes hanging up, Arya's photo taped to the wall, and makes a decision that tears her chest in half. Because sometimes loving someone means becoming invisible again, even if it kills you.
She doesn't say goodbye, doesn't leave a letter, doesn't offer explanations. It would only make everything harder. Maddison simply vanishes, resigns by email, blocks Roman's number, grabs her things, and disappears the same way she appeared, as if she'd never really been there. She moves to an even smaller apartment in Queens, goes back to working night shifts, this time at a hospital, and tries to rebuild the life she had before meeting Roman Callahan. But the body remembers. Her hands tremble when she cleans rooms that smell of disinfectant instead of imported coffee. Her heart aches when she sees men in suits who aren't him. And at night, alone in the darkness, Maddison cries in a way she's never cried before. Because she didn't just lose a job, didn't just lose a love. She lost the version of herself that believed, for one fleeting, dangerous moment, that she deserves something better. Roman searches. Of course he searches. He calls 50 times on the first day, sends messages that range from confused to desperate, shows up at the old apartment and finds the door locked, the place empty, no trace that she was there. He hires investigators, but Maddison was careful, changed her number, avoided social media, asked friends not to reveal anything. She didn't do this out of cruelty. Did it because she knows that if he finds her, if he looks at her in that way that makes the world disappear, she won't have the strength to leave again. And he needs to move on, needs to rebuild the empire without the burden of having to choose between her and everything else. So Maddison does what she's always done, becomes invisible. Just another person in the New York crowd, cleaning the spaces others occupy, surviving in silence. But this time, invisibility doesn't protect her. This time it's just an open wound that won't heal.
3 months later, Maddison is cleaning the 5th floor hallway in the hospital when she sees a news story on the waiting room television. Roman Callahan is on screen, giving an interview about the company's recovery. He's thinner. There are lines on his face she doesn't remember seeing, but there's something more, a fierce, almost angry determination. "We changed our structure," he's saying. "We prioritized employees, cut executive salaries, and invested in social programs. We lost some investors, but we gained something more important: integrity." The journalist asks about the romance rumors. Roman pauses too long, and Maddison sees pain flash across his face like lightning. "She taught me that doing the right thing has a cost, and that some people are willing to pay that cost alone, even when they shouldn't have to." The camera moves closer, and Roman looks directly at her, not at the camera, but at her, as if he knows that somewhere, somehow, Maddison is watching. "If you're seeing this now," he says, his voice cracking slightly, "know that nothing I've built is worth anything without you to share it with." The screen goes dark, and Maddison collapses right there in the empty hospital corridor, crying silently while the world keeps spinning without caring. Because sometimes love isn't about happy endings. Sometimes it's just about two people who found each other at the wrong time, in the wrong place, and who loved with an intensity the world was never going to allow to last.
6 months dragged by like an eternity of routine and emotional anesthesia. Maddison woke up, worked, slept, repeated, sent money to Arya, more now, enough to finally get her out of the shelter and bring her to live in Queens. The 16-year-old arrived with a worn suitcase and eyes that asked questions Maddison didn't have the courage to answer. "You're different," Arya said on the first night, sitting on the narrow bed they now shared. "Quieter, like a part of you stayed somewhere." Maddison just smiled, that empty smile she'd perfected over the past months, and changed the subject. But Arya was right. A part of her had stayed in a glass and steel office in the eyes of a man who saw her when the rest of the world pretended she didn't exist, and there was no way to get that back. So she stopped trying. The letter arrived on a Thursday in April, when Manhattan was finally beginning to bloom with that false promise of renewal that spring always brings. Maddison almost threw it away, just another unimportant piece of mail among bills and advertisements. But then she saw the cream-colored envelope, heavy, expensive, with her name written by hand in handwriting she'd recognize anywhere. Her hands trembled, her heart raced. She stood in the hallway too long, holding that piece of paper like it was a grenade about to explode, because she knew that opening it meant feeling everything again, meant tearing down the layers of protection she'd built so carefully. But in the end, curiosity, or maybe longing, or maybe just the need to know he was okay, won. She opened it, and the world stopped. The letter wasn't long. Roman was never one for many words when it mattered, but each sentence was a direct blow to the chest, precise and devastating. "Maddison, it took me 6 months to write this because I needed to be sure it was the right thing to say. The company survived. We restructured everything. I fired half the executives, including Calvin. We prioritized employees, created a fund for families affected by past decisions. The numbers are better than ever. And you know why? Because you taught me that integrity isn't weakness, that doing the right thing isn't naivety." Maddison swallowed hard, tears already blurring her vision, but kept reading. "You thought you were saving me when you left, thought I'd choose the company over you, and that your absence would make everything easier. But you didn't understand one fundamental thing. You didn't make me lose anything. You made me gain what really matters. Thank you for tearing up the contract I was about to sign with my own conscience." The tears fall now without control, staining the paper, but Maddison can't stop reading. There's more. "I'm not asking you to come back. I won't look for you, won't show up at your door demanding explanations or second chances, because I understood something about you, Maddison. You've spent your life believing you don't deserve to be chosen, that your place is in the shadows, serving, caring for others, but never being cared for. And nothing I say will change that. This is a fight only you can have with yourself." The words are accurate, relentless, too true to be comfortable. Maddison feels as if he's there, in front of her, saying all of this while looking at her with that intensity that always disarms her. "But I want you to know one thing," the letter continues. "If one day you wake up and realize you deserve love without guilt, belonging without shame, happiness without fear, I'll be here. No matter how much time passes, no matter what happens, because you weren't just the woman who saved my company. You were the woman who saved me from becoming the man I most feared being."
The letter ends with an address. It's not the office, not the Manhattan penthouse she's only seen in photos online. It's a place in upstate New York, far from the city, far from stares and judgments. "I bought a house, simple, far from everything. It's my place to think, to rebuild who I am when I don't have to be the CEO, the billionaire, the man everyone expects things from. If you want to find me, I'll be there on weekends. If you don't, I'll keep forever the memory of a woman brave enough to tell me the truth when I needed to hear it most. With all the love you never believed you deserved. Roman." Maddison folds the letter with trembling hands and presses it to her chest, as if she could absorb the words, as if she could keep that piece of paper next to the heart he carried with him when he left. She doesn't know what to do, doesn't know if she has the courage, doesn't know if she deserves it. But for the first time in 6 months, she feels something beyond numbness, feels hope, small, fragile, dangerous, but alive. Arya finds Maddison sitting on the bed, the letter still pressed to her chest, her eyes red but dry now. "Who sent that?" the girl asks, sitting down beside her with that teenage curiosity that knows no bounds. Maddison hesitates. She hasn't talked about Roman, couldn't. Talking about him would mean admitting he existed, that they existed, that there was a moment when she believed in something beyond survival. But now, looking at the sister she finally has by her side, at the girl she fought so hard to protect, Maddison realizes that maybe it's time to stop hiding. "Someone who taught me I deserve more than I always believed," she finally responds, her voice low but steady. Arya frowns, processing, and then smiles, that hopeful smile only the young can have. "So what are you waiting for?" The question hangs in the air, simple, devastating, impossible to ignore.
Maddison doesn't go that day, not the next day. She keeps the letter in the drawer, among important documents and the few photos she has of her mother. But sometimes, late at night when Arya is already asleep and the apartment is silent, she takes it out and reads it again. And each time she reads it, something inside her changes, not dramatically, not in a way that solves everything, but gradually, like a wound that's finally beginning to heal. Maddison begins to consider the impossible, that maybe Calvin was wrong, that maybe she's not a liability, but a possibility, that maybe love doesn't always have to hurt. And on a Sunday morning, when the light comes through the window differently and Arya is making pancakes from a recipe she found online, Maddison picks up her phone, looks up the address, and for the first time in 6 months, allows herself to imagine a future that isn't just survival. What she'll do with that imagination, whether she'll let it die or feed it until it becomes real, is still to be written. But the letter remains, the address remains, and somewhere in upstate New York, a man is waiting. Not with demands, not with ultimatums, just with the silent promise that if she shows up, he'll be there. And sometimes that's all love can offer. Not guarantees, but possibilities. Not endings, but new beginnings.
Just as Maddison discovered that love can transform everything, not magically, but through the courage to believe she deserved to be seen, chosen, and loved, each of us also carries that power of transformation within ourselves. Stories like this remind us that it's never too late to start over, to tear up the invisible contracts we've signed with our own limitations, and to believe that true love isn't the kind that comes without cost, but the kind that makes us pay the right price, the courage to be vulnerable. Maddison's journey didn't end with a perfect ending wrapped in a bow. It ended with a choice still to be made, with a letter kept close to her heart, and with the awareness that sometimes loving someone means first learning to believe that you also deserve to be loved. And that, perhaps, is the most powerful lesson of all, that real transformation happens not when someone saves us, but when we finally allow ourselves to be saved. If this story touched you, write in the comments, "Love transforms lives," and share which part of Maddison's journey resonated most with your own heart. Subscribe to Eternal Romance Stories and experience with each episode emotions that warm the soul and reflections that transform the heart. Here, every story is an invitation to feel, to question, and to believe that love, in all its imperfect and courageous forms, is still worth it. And this was just one of many stories that will still move you here.